Before heading out of Scottsdale, I spend most of the night shacked up in a 2-star by the airport. I spend this time collecting my notes on Will Bruder's library in Taliesin West, uploading video footage, double-checking directions, and getting ice for my cooler. Apparently, when a road trip turns into a working sabbatical, drudgery often replaces a good night on the town. I discover an interview online with Will Bruder, where Bruder is asked what buildings he would suggest someone see when they visit Phoenix. He mentions a number of buildings, notably Richard Myers Courthouse and his own library. But he also suggests one of his own buildings that I had never heard of. Well, this was good. This seemed like an opportunity. My only plan for the next day was driving, so I woke up earlier than usual and headed out towards the edge of a nearby community called Deer Valley, and arrived mid-morning at the edge of a development in the desert. The GPS guides me to the remote address, and I'm startled. Bruder's suggestion is a building that stands in stark contrast to his Phoenix library, consisting of a modest museum and research center inside of a petroglyph conservancy called the Deer Valley Rock Art Center. Inside, the docent tells me the research center leads out to a quarter-mile trail around a petroglyph site. It's 105 degrees today. She asks if I have a hat. I tell her yes, inside my bag. The Deer Valley Rock Art Center is run by Arizona State University. It provides access to the Hedgepeth Hills petroglyph site, as well as houses an archives and research center. The center admits that the details of the petroglyphs is, at best, interpretation, but what they are was best explained to me by Little Bear, who told me it's best not to think of what they represent specifically, but rather to think of them as representing what's important to the people who made them. I met Little Bear at the end of the trailhead, where he found me photographing the rest benches and steel pipe scopes Bruder designed to highlight the petroglyphs up on the side of Hedgepeth Hill. Little Bear is a public educator for the Rock Art Center and an archaeology professor at Arizona State University. He walks with me along the remainder of the trail and delivers a good primer on petroglyphs, which evolves pretty nicely into a discussion on the Rock Art Center and its architecture. Little Bear turns out to be an acquaintance of Bruder, so I ask if he knows why Bruder would consider this building one of his favorites.
This was his, for no better factor, awakening. This building is what actually brought him into the forefront, into what is referred to as stealth architecture. Integrating, going beyond Frank Lloyd Wright's concept of putting the building in the environment, he's actually meshing the building into the environment instead of just putting the building in the environment. This is supposed to literally be a part of the environment, not separate from the environment, not harmony with the environment, a part of the environment. There's a lot of play on lighting, play on the psychology of mind, how the mind interprets the angle shifts, the should I say, parallel lines. All of this has a direct impact, even subconsciously, when somebody walks in, they're observing the building subconsciously. The outside back door, as you walk out, it's designed to be a portal to take you from the tangible manifestation of our world to an exterior portal leading to a nature reserve. It gives you that factor that you stepped into another world. That's why he's got the grading, that's why it angles at a specific angle and so forth. Everything he did was intentional.
The Deer Valley Rock Art Center is a building that didn't exist. Without realizing it, I had been shot through a tunnel I never realized I entered, and suddenly found myself standing in the middle of a wide open nowhere. After exiting the building, the trailhead loops a quarter-mile around to the entrance, at which point the trail crosses a bridge that offers the only vantage point towards the building. And even then, it's tough to distinguish it from everything else around it. As I moved a little closer, something started to catch my attention. It's hard to explain what it was, because it's not any one thing, but something I started to notice in the detail. There's a freedom in the decisions atypical of a project like this. This building, it's a passion project. It feels like somebody's awakening.
Part of the factor involved is now Will designed the building to his specifications, period. But the Army Corps of Engineers actually funded everything and paid for everything. Nice. So he had the liberty to do what he wanted to do. Literally. There was a point where things shifted and he got this view that was able to manifest itself into the next level. This is his level.
Buildings may define space with boundaries, but the Deer Valley project defines it with a window. No fence encloses the petroglyph site, and the building is neither a monument nor a monolith. For me, however, where the building succeeds most isn't in something tectonic, but rather how it puts to rest one of the worst apprehensions I've had about this entire trip. So, now's as good a time as any to discuss it. I knew from the inception of this road trip that I'd be spending a good portion of my time treading across native reservations, and more broadly, that the entire trip treads across land that natives consider sacred. This is a trip about architecture, but it can't also avoid being a trip about land use. How we build is how we survive, and the ancient culture in Native America is an architectural society built on the back of survival. It only takes a single glance at a photo of Chaco Canyon to understand this. The fact that I'm visiting these places for personal reasons and, most importantly, within the context of a travelogue, puts me in conflict with the most potent metaphor for the plight of native cultures in America. Like the building sites themselves, I might also be reducing the spirit of a culture to a soundbite, designed for the consumption of a well-meaning public. I also might be guilty of taking the spirit of a culture, shooting it, framing it, putting it inside of a box, and turning it into a story. These apprehensions are why Deer Valley became such an eye-opening project. In deference to a sacred petroglyph site, Bruder didn't build a fence. He didn't build a frame. In fact, it seems like he didn't build anything. These apprehensions also make me nervous about approaching the topic of a sovereign culture in my own backyard. So nervous, in fact, that even though Little Bear is a university professor, and even though he's an outreach program coordinator, because he's also an Apache Indian, I'm too nervous to ask if I can videotape our discussion. Some half-baked assumption about camera stealing souls. Instead, I ask if I can record the audio and spend the rest of the afternoon waving a shotgun mic at him. Before I left, the side of me that's an architecture student deferred to the side of Little Bear that's an archaeology professor, and I asked for advice regarding my conduct among native cultures. Could he tell me things beyond the things that I think I already know, like how it's impolite to look Navajos directly in the eye? And I'll admit, hearing the question come out of my mouth sounded silly, but I figured anyone who volunteers to give archaeology tours to fourth graders has probably heard sillier. And he explained that while these norms are important cultural standards, today's Native American cultures are a modern people. Ask before you take pictures, but that's normal anywhere. Just be kind, be polite, be hospitable. Just be good. Just be good. His advice gives me a sense of permission, but not without reservations. I'm still uncomfortable about covering the topic in my travelogues in spite of the fact that it's the context for almost a dozen destinations on my road trip and the greater context for history in the American West. While walking along the Conservancy's trail, Little Bear mentioned that his tribal title translates to revealer of what is already known, which loosely translates to a shaman. So right there, along a desert trail, with those words, I was suddenly tied to the train tracks of a lousy road trip cliche about Native Americans. Except that in my case, this isn't a cliche about meeting a shaman who shared his innermost cultural secrets with me. Instead, it's a story about a shaman who suggested that in my travels, all I need to do is follow the golden rule.
My simple daddy, don't you know that things go in cycles? My simple daddy, don't you know that things go in cycles?
No, I was living by the river, but I came upstream. I let off steam, and now I'm by another one. I came up out of the valley, no words for the wear, but with less to spend. Brought along a friend, I can always use another one, man. So on and so on, the water flows a lyrical lilt for the bridge built. They always need another one, so I pulled the cable tight, I'm able, so I turned on the mic and took a chance. I may never get another one.